Nitroglycerin is the 57th adventure of Lucky Luke and was first published in 1987. The drawings were provided by the comic's creator, Maurice, and the story was written by Lou Hartog van Banda. 4 years later, this comic was made into an episode of the second animated television series of Lucky Luke adaptations. How faithful was this adaptation? Let's see if we can spot the differences. The heads of the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific announced that the contracts for building the railroad is to be split between the two companies, much to the outrage of the men at the meeting.
That's the thanks we get for all the bribes we paid!
In the episode, the drawing of the two men marching out of the office is switched, so that the fatter man does the complaining. Also, the leader of the Union Pacific has a painting slammed onto his head, but in the episode he has things thrown at him, just like his rival. A rat-faced, unnamed member of the Union Pacific Board vows to sabotage the Central Pacific Railroad's work by stealing the explosives they use to make tunnels. In the comic, he has 2 henchmen, but in the episode he only gets 1. Captain Redbuff overhears one of the villains insulting his boat and attacks him. In the episode, despite the buck-toothed baddie doing the insulting, the captain still has a shakedown with the henchman. Redbuff is then approached by 2 other men who also insult his boat. In the comic he knocks them down, but in the episode they interrupt him before he can strike.
Come back, you thieves! Come back, you hear?
As the captain gives chase to the villains, we meet his first mate, who is automatically established as a coward. In the episode, the sailor does not appear until the next scene. The villains park the boat containing gunpowder next to the penitentiary and set it on fire, resulting in an explosion that makes a hole in the prison wall, allowing the Dalton brothers to escape. In the comic, the Daltons are first shown with Joe banging his head against the wall for no reason besides his blatant psychotic nature. Lucky Luke is hired by the Central Pacific to prevent the Union Pacific saboteurs from getting their hands on a train carrying nitroglycerin, which is to be driven by Captain Redbuff. In the comic, it is explained that all train drivers claim to be too ill to drive the train, but no such explanation is given in the episode. As the sailor tries to run away, the suspenders on his overalls snap, but are fixed by the next shot he appears in. This does not happen in the comic. In the comic, the soldiers are shown to be just as terrified of the nitroglycerin as the sailor is, whereas in the episode they are all cheerfully waving bon voyage to the convoy. Like in the other adaptations, in this series the soldiers' uniforms were changed from black shirts and blue trousers to blue shirts and black trousers. The Daltons ambush 4 of the soldiers, stealing their uniforms and horses. In the comic, the attack isn't shown. Also in the comic, Avril remains in his bush while the Daltons first ride after the train.
Come on, let's go. Looks like business is looking up.
When the captain and the sailor go to the station, one of the henchmen tries to grab Redbuff, who grabs him instead. He is then knocked out with a pipe by the other henchman, and remains unconscious until after the villains have tied them to some buffers. This does not happen in the episode. When his hat is shot at, Luke uses a telescope to see that the Daltons are approaching the train. The telescope was not used in the comic, and was presumably added since Luke shouldn't have assumed that 4 horsemen in the distance may be his arch-enemies.
And they told me this was an easy job.
After the danger has passed, the captain notices that the sailor's hands had not been tied up, meaning he could have saved them the whole time. In the episode, his hands were tied, and it is not explained how exactly the 3 men escaped.
Well, it's gotta be gold they're carrying in that box, and to guard it, they went and hired Lucky Luke!
Although it is established that the Daltons think the large box contains gold, Joe deciding that the Nitro is the name of the town the gold comes from is not revealed until the end of the episode. The captain's parrot angers the sailor by repeatedly telling him to work harder at pumping the handcart. This is the only time in the comic that the sailor shows any other emotion besides fear, and was not included in the episode. Joe is annoyed that the train is getting away during their brief shootout with Lucky Luke. In the comic, it is Jack who makes this observation, as Joe just wants to focus on killing Luke. When chasing after the train, Luke tries to get them to stop by calling out to them, and when this fails, he tries firing his gun. This terrifies the sailor even more, who insists they go faster. In the episode, Luke doesn't actually try calling stop, but still fires into the air. Also, the captain seems just as frightened as the sailor, and tells him to drive the train faster.
We'll never get across.
Oh no, I've got more horsepower than a train.
When the captain and the sailor arrive at the next station, the parrot insults an elderly woman. She is shocked by this in the comic, and in the episode her response is to knock out the sailor. Two cowboys walk up to Red Buff and insult his boat. Although it is quickly revealed that the villain paid them to do this, in the comic it is revealed before the captain enters the station. Lucky Luke arrives just in time to stop the captain hitting one of the cowboys with a bottle. In the episode, Luke shows up after the fight when the captain throws both cowboys out the window. The other cowboy then tells Luke and Red Buff why the villains have just stolen the train. The cowboy is missing the lump on his head in the episode. Meanwhile, the station master has travelled to his new residence, an abandoned station. He walks to the station in the episode, whereas in the comic he travelled via the handcart. Red Buff and the sailor find it difficult to take control of a pair of horses, and in the comic Red Buff has apparently punched his horse, giving it a black eye. The Daltons catch up to the train, and while in the comic William, Jack and Avril struggle to lift the crate, in the episode only Jack and Avril attempt to lift it.
How'd you like a little business, Undertaker?
Someone dear to you.
Yeah, a valuable friend.
When the Dalton brothers fall about laughing at Joe's pun, William seems to be punching himself in the stomach. This was because, in the comic, Avril was banging his fist on the train. Luke saves a woman's life by taking her away from the platform while the villains and the Daltons shoot at each other. This does not happen in the episode, as neither Luke nor the lady are at the platform. The villains began shooting at the train because they thought Red Buff and the sailor were driving it. When they see it is the Daltons, they are shocked in the comic, but seemingly unfazed in the episode. There is a montage of the captain and sailor being tossed around by their horses. In the comic, the scene begins with the captain having already fallen off his horse. Avril, disguised as the Undertaker, considers eating a vulture, the captain, and a few pages later, the parrot. While this doesn't happen in the episode, they kept the fact that Avril is daydreaming in. William Dalton, who has been driving the train, is not wearing his gloves for the remainder of the comic. The Daltons begin to run after the train when it finally explodes, which is why they are knocked unconscious by the blast. This does not happen in the episode, though they are still briefly knocked out.
There was no gold. It was nitroglycerin.
The blue-suited villain sneaks away from his henchman once it is discovered that he accidentally saved the day. In the comic, the two henchmen first argue with him and then chase after him. The Undertaker is dismayed once he learns from Lucky Luke that no one has been killed by the Nitro's explosion. He does not have time to dwell on this in the episode, as soon as he arrives, Luke tells him to take the Daltons back to prison. In the comic panel where Captain Red Buff thanks Lucky Luke, Joe, William and Jack are shown to no longer have their hands tied up. This was likely a mistake by Morris and does not happen at all in the episode. Instead, the sailor and Red Buff are missing from the hearse, and Avril's head and hands are now twice as large as his body.
If only I could be in a nice, quiet, peaceful place.
You called?